He didn't run a company, he ran a nation of fear. These are the crime lords who built empires so vast even Elon Musk would pause. From private armies to billion-dollar bribes, their lifestyles weren't just illegal, they were unimaginable. But stay until the end, because the final name didn't just buy gold or jets, he tried to pay off an entire country, and almost succeeded. Al Capone, the blueprint of modern crime. Chicago, 1926. Jazz spills from speakeasies, Model T engines rattle down alleys, and one name echoes louder than the horns. Capone. He's only 27, yet he earns more in a week than the US president sees in a year. His headquarters, the Lexington Hotel, floors converted into bulletproof suites and hidden vaults. His product? Prohibition's forbidden nectar moved through a web of underground bars and police escorts who salute before taking bribes. Capone didn't just sell liquor, he purchased the night. Judges received envelopes, reporters received exclusives, and entire precincts answered to Scarface instead of the mayor. By the time accountants tried to tally his books, his empire, bootlegging, gambling, and protection, was raking in the equivalent of $100 million today. One raid uncovered a diamond-studded pocket watch engraved with his initials, because time itself, in Capone's world, served only him. Yet the most lethal weapon he wielded wasn't the Thompson submachine gun, it was public opinion. During the Great Depression, he opened soup kitchens, feeding thousands who forgot, or chose to ignore, the blood on the sidewalks. The media crowned him Robin Hood, a title Capone encouraged even as rivals vanished in broad daylight. But every kingdom has a flaw. Capone's was arrogance. He mocked federal agents, flaunted silk suits, and signed receipts with his real name. When the Treasury finally cornered him, it wasn't bullets or betrayal that ended his reign, it was tax evasion. The man who bought a city fell to an adding machine. His legacy? A masterclass in corruption that future mobsters and even politicians would study like scripture. Comment blueprint if you think Capone wrote the rules every crime lord still follows, or if his empire was just Act 1 in a darker play. Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow who built $1 billion smuggling empire. Miami, late 1970s. Beneath palm trees and disco lights, a petite woman steps out of a limousine, holding her child. Inside her baby's diaper bag, a product that would reshape global crime economics. And her name would become legend, Griselda Blanco. She didn't run a cartel, she ran a corporation disguised as chaos. Her couriers flew international first class, her shipping systems rivaled DHL, and her fashion lines weren't for runway, they were functional concealment. At her peak, Blanco moved tons of high-value goods monthly, and her total revenue was estimated near $2 billion, making her one of the most powerful figures in underground logistics. But efficiency wasn't her only weapon. Fear was part of the brand. Competitors who broke contracts or tried to undercut her operations faced sudden disappearances, while insiders remained silent for reasons no courtroom could document. She was called La Madrina, not just for her leadership, but because her decisions carried weight no one questioned. At home, she lived like royalty. A $30 million mansion faced Biscayne Bay, with private guards, mirrored walls, and soundproofed boardrooms. Every phone line was scrubbed, every conversation calculated. Her staff included attorneys, brokers, and people who never gave last names. Eventually, her downfall came not from force, but from finance. A deep audit, buried offshore companies, and an undercover task force revealed the inner books. She was captured, convicted, and deported. Years later, she would be quietly taken down in her hometown by someone who never asked for a signature. But her legacy remains, a woman who ran her empire like a Fortune 500 CEO before cartel even entered pop culture. Comment the Black Widow if you believe her empire was more strategy than scandal, and if her influence still echoes through today's underworld empires. Carlos Lehder, the island fortress worth $2.7 billion. Turquoise water lapped against Norman's Quay in the late 1970s, but its new owner wanted silence for a different reason. Carlos Lehder, a fiery German-Colombian pilot, quietly spent about $4 million to seize controlling deeds to the Bahamian outpost, then shut the island to tourism overnight. Chain-link fences rose, a 3G radio runway was resurfaced, radar dishes spun like silver sunflowers, and armed patrols treated every inlet as a checkpoint. Lehder's plan was bolder than street dealing. He wanted sovereignty. As co-founder of what journalists later branded the Medellin conglomerate, he turned Norman's Key into a private logistics hub. Cargo jets touched down after midnight, speedboats vanished at dawn, and each rotation funneled payments into offshore accounts until his personal fortune approached $2.7 billion. Yet money served a larger fantasy. Lehder draped buildings with Nazi flags, less ideology than theatrics, a symbol of absolute rule. Staff called him El Presidente. He drafted manifestos, collected vintage aircraft, and spoke of building a utopian micronation financed by contraband. Reporters who ventured too close found anti-aircraft guns aimed at the horizon, as if the Caribbean were suddenly Cold War Berlin. But paradise has satellites. Insurance filings flagged abnormal Boeing traffic. Intercepted radio chatter mapped landing schedules to the minute. In 1983, Bahamian and US agents converged. Lehder escaped by float plane, fled through jungle safe houses, and was captured months later in Colombia. Extradition followed along with a life plus 135-year sentence, later reduced when he testified against an ex-dictator he once idolized. Today, the runway still cuts the island in half, weeds creeping through cracked asphalt. It stands as a monument to a man who tried to stamp his own country onto maritime charts and learned that empires built on secrecy remain invisible only until the first satellite photograph. Rafael Caro Quintero, the silent billionaire behind the curtain. He didn't crave the spotlight. He bought silence. While others flaunted jets and gold-plated mansions, Rafael Caro Quintero built an empire designed to vanish even as it grew. In the early 1980s, he co-founded the Guadalajara Syndicate, one of Mexico's first major networks to industrialize cross-header trade in forbidden goods. But unlike his louder partners, Caro Quintero played a different game. Quiet, patient, calculated. At his peak, his net worth was estimated around $500 million, though much of it never touched a bank. Instead, it flowed into land. Thousands of acres of agricultural plots, cattle ranches, and infrastructure projects served as both front and fortress. Legitimate on paper, profitable in reality, and nearly invisible to enforcement agencies tracking flashier targets. But invisibility doesn't mean immunity. In 1985, Caro Quintero became a prime suspect in the killing of a high-profile American operative, a move that sent international authorities into overdrive. He fled, but was soon arrested in Costa Rica, then sentenced to decades in prison. Yet somehow, even behind bars, his holdings didn't collapse. Shell companies remained active. Profits flowed, influence persisted. Then, in 2013, he walked free due to a legal technicality, sparking diplomatic tension and a global manhunt. He disappeared into the mountains of Sinaloa, allegedly living in rustic compounds guarded more by loyalty than walls. Rumors swirled that he funded highways, paid local school teachers, and ruled from exile like a feudal ghost king. While others went viral or died in shootouts, Caro Quintero became something rarer, a myth with a balance sheet. A man whose absence only deepened his presence, and whose empire, built on farmland and silence, may still be earning, long after his name stopped making headlines. Not all power's loud. Some of it is buried deep under crops, concrete, and decades of shadows. Khun Sa, the jungle tycoon worth $5 billion. Dense mist blankets Myanmar's Shan Hills at dawn, and a convoy rumbles along red clay switchbacks. At the crest waits Khun Sa, half warlord, half prime minister of an outlaw nation no map dared acknowledge. In the 1980s, his militia topped 20,000 troops, securing every ridgeline and river crossing in the Golden Triangle. Checkpoints collected tolls, caravans paid export fees, and regional governors negotiated instead of fought. They knew who financed their roads and clinics. Khun Sa's commodity was the poppy, refined in jungle labs and ferried to world capitals by mule, long-tail boat and eventually camouflage-painted trucks. US analysts estimated he controlled 60% of global supply, converting remote farmland into a shadow stock exchange. At his peak, intelligence reports pegged his personal fortune near $5 billion. Money laundered through jade markets, Hong Kong property, and Bangkok gold shops that never asked for passports. But what set him apart wasn't volume, it was governance. He issued travel permits, levied taxes, and drafted ceasefires like a head of state. Diplomats called the enclave Khun Sa land. Rumor says he once offered Washington a bargain, recognize his autonomy, and he would dismantle every poppy field within a year. The proposal reached congressional inboxes, then disappeared. Too controversial even for back-channel files. By 1996, under mounting pressure from Thai and Burmese forces, Khun Sa orchestrated his own exit. He surrendered in exchange for safe passage to Yangon, where he reinvented himself as a construction magnate, sipping tea on a city balcony while engineers laid foundations financed by decades of clandestine trade. When he died in 2007, he left behind paved highways, modern markets, and a blueprint proving that with enough cash and guns, a trafficker can morph into a de facto government. Comment Jungle Kingdom if you think running an illicit state disguises genius beneath the chaos, or if the cost to society was too steep for any fortune to justify. The one that helped them go, Guzman, the Tunnel King. Picture a desert night on the Arizona-Sonora line. A hatch pops open in the sand, a conveyor belt hums beneath sagebrush, and packages vanish into America before the moon can blink. That mechanical whisper, more than any firefight, made Joaquin Guzman legendary. Nicknamed El Chapo for his 5'6" frame, he compensated with depth, not height. A labyrinth of tunnels so advanced they boasted electric rail carts, ventilation shafts, and GPS-precise exits inside suburban garages. Guzman didn't just smuggle, he engineered logistics. Civil engineers later measured one flagship tunnel at 1.5 kilometers, reinforced with lumber and steel, bored in 90 days under a budget rivaling a boutique hotel. At scale, the network moved an estimated $3 billion in product annually, quiet commerce beneath immigration checkpoints and motion sensors that never heard a drill. His mastery of underground space extended to prison walls. In 2015, security cameras caught him pacing his cell shower. He knelt, disappeared through a hole the size of a microwave, descended a ladder, mounted a motorcycle rigged to rails, and rode to daylight, leaving guards staring at an empty bunk. The escape cost investigators months and, allegedly, millions in hush payments. But it cost Guzman only minutes of freedom. He emerged a folk anti-hero and a nightmare for authorities tracking public perception. Money followed mythology. Ranches in Sinaloa doubled as safe houses. Local politicians accepted campaign donations wrapped in manila. Gold ingots were hidden in hay bales. Yet every peso served one goal: maintain the pipeline. Guzman treated land above ground as camouflage for the arteries below, confident that concrete lids and quiet motors could outthink satellites. They couldn't forever. Captured in 2016 and extradited north, he now spends his life in a supermax cell, where every wall is poured concrete and the floor is checked hourly. No trapdoors, no ladders. For the man who built an empire beneath everyone's feet, the final tunnel leads nowhere. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies. At 30,000 feet, most people travel. Amado Carrillo Fuentes built an empire. Dubbed El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies, Carrillo didn't rule cities or jungles. He ruled airspace. While others relied on boats and back roads, he assembled a private fleet of over 20 Boeing 727s, modifying each to carry high-value cargo from South America directly into the US and beyond. Customs scanners couldn't keep up. Radar couldn't catch him. He made the skies his superhighway, and no one charged tolls. Unlike the flamboyant dons of his generation, Carrillo didn't crave fame. He preferred spreadsheets to shootouts. His laundering operation funneled billions into luxury hotels, high-rise condos and beachfront resorts. All technically legal, all profitable. Some reports estimated his empire at $25 billion, putting him in the league of Fortune 100 executives, minus the press conferences. To maintain control, Carrillo embedded himself in the system. He didn't just bribe low-level customs officers, he cultivated relationships with air traffic officials, airport executives, even political aides. Pilots flew by coded radio, flight paths were swapped mid-air. Surveillance blips vanished with a single favor. But power like this demands invisibility. In 1997, Carrillo checked into a private hospital under a false name for full-body plastic surgery, hoping to erase his identity forever. The operation failed. He died on the table. His empire left scrambling, the man himself becoming ghost and myth overnight. His funeral was fit for royalty. Hundreds of black Suburbans, armored men, and a golden casket guarded like state treasure. Investigators found he'd built a web so complex, parts of it still functioned years after his death. His story wasn't about violence. It was about vertical dominance. A man who looked at the clouds and saw not sky, but opportunity. Dawood Ibrahim, the shadow state. In the narrow alleys of Mumbai's Dongri district, a young street hustler once ran rackets with pocket change. Within 2 decades, he became the CEO of a global empire built in the dark. Dawood Ibrahim didn't just operate in the underworld, he built a government inside it. They called it D Company. But to insiders, it functioned more like a shadow cabinet. At its peak, his network stretched across 5 continents, allegedly controlling pipelines in arms, counterfeit currency, narcotics, and international extortion. Reports from Indian intelligence estimate his financial reach at over $6.7 billion, with stakes in construction firms, foreign banks, real estate developments in Dubai, and even rumored investments in Bollywood films, offering both profit and protection. But it wasn't just money that made him untouchable, it was alignment. Allegedly shielded by Pakistan's powerful intelligence agency, ISI, Ibrahim's presence blurred the line between crime syndicate and state-sponsored entity. He didn't just evade capture, he negotiated around it, using diplomatic shadows and legal loopholes that most governments would envy. His most infamous act: suspected orchestration of the 1993 Bombay bombings, which left over 250 dead and altered India's security doctrine forever. Since then, he's been labeled a global terrorist, yet he continues to move like smoke. Seen in golf resorts, whispered about in banking circles, photographed but never arrested. What makes Dawood's story terrifying isn't the violence, it's the structure. While others built cartels, he built infrastructure. While rivals bought loyalty with cash, he brokered silence with influence. His empire wasn't built to be flashy, it was built to last. And in many corners of the world, it still quietly operates today. Because sometimes the most powerful governments aren't elected. They're built in the shadows, and they never hold press conferences. Semon Mogilevich, the invisible billionaire, he never fired a gun in public. He didn't need to. Semon Mogilevich built one of the most powerful crime syndicates in history, armed not with soldiers, but with offshore trusts, fake securities, and international loopholes. Born in Soviet Zhero, Ukraine, Mogilevich rose to prominence in the 1990s during the chaos of post-Cold War privatization. As former state assets flooded into private hands, he seized his moment, setting up dozens of shell companies across Hungary, Cyprus, and the United States. His operations were masked as investment firms, energy exporters, or art dealers. Behind them, a global laundering machine, washing billions through legal banks. At its height, Mogilevich's network moved fraudulent oil contracts, manipulated stock markets, and brokered weapons deals under the cover of legitimate trade. The FBI estimated his total financial footprint at $10 billion, though many believe that's a conservative number. Unlike other crime bosses, he rarely left a trace. No extravagant mansions, no viral headlines, no trail of violence. Just paperwork, misdirection, and a wall of legal grey zones. But what truly made him untouchable? Alleged protection from powerful figures within the Russian Federation. Despite being on the FBI's most wanted list, Mogilevich has lived openly in Moscow for years, with reports suggesting high-level political connections. Some sources even claim he attended government functions and traveled with immunity. While most criminal empires collapse when their leaders fall, Mogilevich built something different. A structure so decentralized, so embedded in global finance, that no single takedown could bring it down. His story isn't about fear, it's about control. About mastering the invisible rules that move money faster than missiles and deeper than any courtroom can reach. In a world obsessed with firepower and fame, Semon Mogilevich chose neither and still came out as one of the most powerful men you've never seen. Pablo Escobar, the billionaire who tried to buy a country. He wasn't just a criminal, Pablo Escobar was a nation builder of his own design. By the late 1986, Escobar controlled 80% of the global cocaine market, earning an astonishing $420 million per week. His wealth stacked so high that rats reportedly ate over $1 billion in cash stored in hidden warehouses, because there was nowhere left to put it. But money wasn't enough. Escobar wanted immortality. In one of his most infamous moves, he offered to pay off Colombia's entire $10 billion national debt in exchange for immunity from extradition. That wasn't a bribe. It was a hostile takeover wrapped in generosity. His estate, Hacienda Nápoles, featured its own airport, artificial lakes, and a private zoo with imported elephants, hippos, and giraffes. For his daughter, he once burned $2 million in cash to keep her warm while they hid in the mountains. These weren't just extravagances, they were statements. I can outspend the state. What made Escobar truly dangerous wasn't just his firepower, it was his strategy. He built entire neighborhoods, funded schools, soccer fields, and food programs. To many in Medellin's poorest barrios, he wasn't a criminal, he was a savior. This public loyalty became a shield even armored vehicles couldn't penetrate. When cornered, Escobar didn't hide in bunkers. He built his own prison, La Catedral, complete with a bar, waterfall, and satellite phone. It was less a sentence, more a CEO retreat with guards who answered to him. His empire eventually fell, but his blueprint didn't. Cartels today still follow his model: diversify power, own public perception, and always keep cash where governments can't reach. Comment the king if you believe no one, not even Elon Musk, has ever bent a country like Escobar did. They weren't just criminals. They were empire builders, flipping drugs into diplomacy, bullets into ballots, and bribes into borders. Some ruled jungles, others ruled stock markets. But one thing bound them all: power beyond the reach of money alone. And while Elon Musk may reshape the future with rockets, these men reshaped nations with fear, influence, and untouchable strategy. If this story made you see power in a different light, like, subscribe, and follow Billionaire Story, because next time we're revealing the one boss who vanished with billions and was never seen again.